Welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to What's the Point? I'm your host, Bill Ellis, and today I'm very happy to have a guest who has a great deal of experience and insight that she's going to share with us that I guarantee will help you find out what's your point. My guest today is Jacki McEwen-Powell. She is a veteran in the communications business. She started an agency some 25 years ago in South Africa, and it's been tremendously successful. Recently, she has taken a shift in her career. She's retrained as a certified Integrative Nutrition Health Coach. That's a mouthful. She's also become an author, having recently published 2 books on those topics, and we'll get into a lot more on what that means and how it can benefit you and people that you know with gut issues here in just a minute. But let me quit talking and say hello, Jacki. Welcome, and thank you so much for the gift of your time.
No, hi, Bill, and thank you for having me on your show. It's amazing to be here.
Yeah, it's terrific. So there's so much that I want to cover with you, and I think the best thing to do is just ask you about the starting point, your starting point prior to business, just a little bit of your background. How'd you get to the communications business, and then we'll talk about that and more.
Sure. So I started, I guess, my career not really knowing what I wanted to do. Well, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do, which was journalism. And I wanted to study to be a journalist at university, and life had different plans for me. The results that I got at school weren't sufficient to get me into university to do the course that I wanted to do. And by default and happenstance, and where my mother happened to be working at the time, I ended up studying public relations, which was a blessing. I started my own agency really young. I was 26 years old. Again, life had plans. I didn't intend to start my own agency, except when I was 18, I took out a life insurance policy, and it was an endowment policy that paid out when I was 21. And I remember the broker asking me, well, what are you going to do with the payout? And I said very flippantly at, ripe old age of 18, well, I'll start my own business. And as it happened, I did. Yeah. So I had a job, and we were employing someone, and I was in the process of interviewing her for the position, and something went horribly wrong with the job that I had at the time. And I had to go to her and apologize terribly that we weren't going to be able to employ her, even though she was quite far down the line in terms of resigning from her current position, etc. And she said, well, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? And I said, oh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that yet. Maybe open my own business. And she said, okay, I'll do it with you. So from potentially employing someone, she ended up being a business partner of mine. And so we fell into this ownership of a business, which we ran successfully together for many years. And then our paths, I sold the business to my current partner, and then rejoined the business as an equal partner in the business. And the rest, I guess, is history. 25 years later, an incredibly strong, healthy, amazing business in the communication space. And then, as you rightly say, I decided to take a step back from the business. So as much as the business is still running and doing really well, I decided that it was time for me to retire for several reasons. The first is that I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, ulcerative colitis. One of the big triggers of ulcerative colitis is stress. And there's no denying that PR is an incredibly stressful position. It's PR, not PR. It's sometimes difficult to remember when you're in the moment. So I took a step back from the business, and it was at a time that the business was able to do that. So we'd grown the business to the point that there was enough seniority in the business that it didn't need me anymore, which was an amazing position to be in. And then looked around.
Let me just for a second, if it's okay. Sorry to interrupt, but what I'd like to do is go even to an earlier starting point, the starting point of Jacki McEwen. So just a little bit about your background and how you grew up. Clearly, you don't have the American accent. You're South African, but share with us a little bit what that was like, because that's as interesting to a lot of people that have never been there. Just experiencing a different culture, regardless of where my listeners are. So give us a little bit about your young Jacki years.
So that wouldn't be Jacki McEwen. That would be Jackie Draper. So
okay.
Yeah, I was born in Cape Town, born and bred, lived in Cape Town almost my entire life up until, gosh, very recently when I immigrated to the United Kingdom. And I now live between both countries. But my early childhood was spent entirely in Cape Town. And I had, I think, what I would call a very traditional upbringing. Grew up in a two-parent household, white picket fence, a beautiful suburb called Edgemead, where all my friends were neighbors. We played in the street. We went camping. We really, I think, had a wonderful childhood and upbringing, spent a lot of time outdoors, which is a phenomenal way to be brought up, and was therefore really connected to nature. Loved the sea. My father was a surfer, one of the first surfers in South Africa, so I spent a lot of time in the water with him and alone. I was a surfer and boogie boarder in my younger years. So yeah, I enjoyed dancing, enjoyed music, just had a really, I would say, very charmed and blessed childhood.
And that's very cool. And I'm glad to hear that you did. And I'm glad that that was the starting point to get you where you are today. Yeah, the Cape Town and the West Coast is beautiful. It's just a spectacular area. My little plug for tourism to South Africa, as is the East Coast, by the way. But that's neither here nor there, and that's not why we have you on to talk tourism. So what was the point in your starting the business that what was the scariest thing about starting that business? And when did you reach the point of realizing it was a good decision?
I am a risk taker. So I've had a lot of turning points in my life, and I'm sure we're going to unpack a lot of those, but none of them have felt at the time particularly scary and particularly risky.
Okay.
Which is, I just think, part of my nature. I very much go with the flow and the energy of what life presents at the time, follow what energizes me, and I probably should spend more time reflecting on the risks that are involved with that, but I don't. And I think the biggest risk was probably the fact that I was not going to have a solid revenue or guaranteed revenue if the business didn't succeed. But again, that really didn't frighten me. I've never had a poverty consciousness. I've never worried about where money's going to come from. I know it will flow. Yeah, so there were risks, of course there were. And interestingly enough, as I started the business, I also fell pregnant. So ended up having a child and was newly married, got married in that same year. So got married, had a child, and started a business all at the age of 26, and none of it scared me.
Well, what else were you doing? I mean, it's as if you had a lot of time on your hands, right? That's amazing.
Exactly.
That's quite the full workload or life load is a better way to put that, I guess. So not having a tremendous amount of fear about the risk of things, which is a wonderful attribute and one that I think myself and most of my listeners would like to embrace more, because that opens so many doors for us. What are the most meaningful things to you that you have undertaken that other people would say that's pretty risky, and you just went, yeah, risk is risk, let's go and see where it ends up?
Well, the first was probably getting divorced, which is unpopular, I guess, but a very risky thing to do. I think a lot of people stay in marriages that they're not entirely happy with. And don't get me wrong, my first husband was and remains a wonderful man. He was a great friend of mine. I love him and loved him dearly, but we just weren't right for one another. And I realized that pretty early on. And I think that was probably one of the bravest decisions that I've had to make in life. When you are very much frowned upon by society, by friends, by family, you're turning your back on a lot, run the risk of losing friends. It's a very, very difficult move to make, and one that, if I look back on my life and the trajectory of my life, probably one of my more proud moments. Not proud that I left the marriage, but proud that I was able to choose me over choosing convention. So that would be one.
Wow, what a powerful example of stepping up and facing what life gives us. and doing it based on our own standards, our own needs, and not being affected or we, of course you were affected, but not being driven or decisions made by outside influence. That is incredibly difficult to do, especially, I would assume, as a young mother, a young business owner, and a relatively young wife. I'm so glad to hear you say that your first husband is a terrific man and you still love him, because what I'm going to do here is take a shift. We're gonna hit a little turning point in our conversation, and that is what you just said about realizing that you were in the wrong place in your marriage. It was your husband was great and all of that was great, but it wasn't right for you, which had to, I think, mean that partly wasn't right for him either. But shift that into a professional business setting. So many people, I find, myself included in my history, are unable to take that, not risk, but that have the realization that this isn't the right place for me and move on from that career. You've done that, not necessarily that it wasn't the right place, but it was time for you to move on. And you've done that in several instances. Tell us about your approach to that. Most recently, obviously, the getting out of the active participation in Eclipse Communications and starting a whole new professional area. Talk to us about that, please.
Sure. So I think for me, it's about, my whole point is trust your gut and about being in touch with what really triggers you in a positive way and in a negative way, and being true to you. Because at the end of the day, you are here for a life's purpose, is my belief. We all have a personal journey or a personal legend, and it's our responsibility to stay true to that. We should not be living other people's journeys or other people's lives, and nobody knows our lives, our journeys, our life's purpose better than we do. And it's about tapping into that intuition, being quiet with yourself, having moments of introspection, and coming to realize what's right for you, and then not letting the noise of the rest of the world crowd that out, because nobody knows you like you know you. So it's follow your gut. That would be my advice.
Brilliant. And let me ask you this as kind of an add-on to that. Do you have what I would call trusted advisors, people close in your circle that you can bounce your thinking off of? Because it's easy to have the thought that I'm going to change this, but then when it comes to having the courage and or the validation that it has potential to be the right move or potential to be a disaster, how have you approached that with your inner circle?
I think it's so crucial to have an inner circle that ultimately supports you, but I also have, again, possibly a bit of an unconventional belief system, in that I do believe that we are put on this earth with spirit families. And I think that we are surrounded by people that are brought into our lives at various times, then leave our lives at various times to help us learn the lessons that we are here to learn and to live the life that we're supposed to live. So I think if you can trust that the people around you are there for a purpose and, a moment, or what do they say, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And not everybody could be in your life for a lifetime, but there's always going to be a reason that they're in your life, and that may just be for a season. And I certainly am surrounded by a lot of people that I believe are here to help me on my journey, guide my thinking, turn me away from an idea if it's a bad idea, as long as I'm, again, being true to my intuition, because sometimes you can hear advice from others and go, yeah, they're right. That feels right. But if you hear it, you can hear advice from lots of different people. And I think the danger is that we start listening to everybody and stop listening to yourself. So it's about taking that advice and then owning the decision. So thank you for your advice. I hear you. I honor the advice you're giving me, but ultimately that doesn't sit right with me. That doesn't feel right for me. I'm not going to take that advice, or I am going to take that advice. And I certainly, a lot of those people, I can think of one very particular incident most recently. My husband, Steve, I had been really, really struggling with what was the direction I was going to take after I'd retrained as the Integrative Nutrition Health Coach. And where I was going to specialize, what would my niche be. And I was really fighting against the advice I was getting from everybody to get more involved in gut health, because that had been my journey. And as they say, your mess is your message. And that certainly had been my mess. And I went one day and I was so delighted with myself. I said, Steve, I have found the thing. I am going to do Ayurveda. And he took one look at me and said, no, you're not. What do you know about Ayurveda? What is that? What on earth would lead you to that decision? It's played no role in your life up until now. You need to focus on people with ulcerative colitis and gut health. I really didn't like the idea of that because it just didn't seem glamorous enough. But in retrospect, probably the best advice I was given.
Okay, well, we're going to get to your books in just a minute. Excuse me. But you just triggered another thought here. That was, we'll call it advice, but what was the sharpest point of criticism that you've received that you were maybe a little uneasy hearing, but over time you realized that it was very beneficial to you?
I don't think anybody could be as harsh a critic of me as I can be of myself. So I'm very aware of criticism. I don't love it. I'm hypersensitive to it. I had an incredibly critical father growing up, so I am very, very aware of criticism, and it triggers me. But at the same time, I'm quite good at not holding on to it. So I actually don't have any moments of heightened criticism that I can think of. I had one recently, which I loved. I love the criticism because we can grow and learn from it. I started turning my book into an audiobook and sent the first couple of chapters off to my sister-in-law and asked her what she thought. And she phoned me, bless her, because I don't think she wanted to put it in writing. But she phoned me to tell me it was absolute rubbish. And she feels so bad for having done that. And I think that's fabulous because I can learn and grow from that. I've started again.
It's so good to hear that kind of thing. And while it might feel like a little bit of a gut punch, it's tremendous to get that insight. My experience in that case is when I wrote Women Who Won, in my first chapter, I had sent it off to one of the greatest writers I know, John David Mann. And he replied with an email, and the subject of the email was "Stop the Presses." And it was very simply, your chapter 1 is horrible. And my next thought was, well, who are you to say? And then I thought, one of the greatest writers, New York Times bestseller, 40, 50 books. Anyway, hearing that kind of thing before we fully execute is great. Just out of curiosity, was she saying that the recording itself was rubbish or the content?
Great question. And I'm glad you asked it because you triggered a thought with me as well when you said, who are you to give me that advice? And I think that's a really good question to ask when you get the criticism. Mm-hmm. A genuine question. Who are you? Is this somebody that I should be taking the criticism from? Because, there's that great analogy that you should not take criticism from people who are not playing the game, because spectators are the greatest critics, but they're spectating for a reason. You take your criticism from the people in the game. And the criticism came from a place of her. She said to me, Jackie, it sounds like you're reading the book. And I said, well, shouldn't I be? It's an audio book. I am reading the book, right? She said, no. She said, it's not supposed to sound like you're reading the book. I said, I actually don't know what you're talking about. And she said, such great advice. And I can't believe I'd never thought about this before. She said, Jackie, have you ever listened to an audiobook? And I said, well, no, I love to read. I've never listened to an audiobook. She said, well, why don't you do that first? So I was like, okay. So I got onto Audible and I downloaded my first book, which is a book I'd wanted to read anyway, and started listening to it. And I had this aha moment of, oh, okay, I get it. It is someone reading a book, but it doesn't sound like you're reading the book. It needs to sound like a conversation, like you're speaking to someone. So just changed my approach completely. And she was so right.
My greatest example of that being true is, and this will be relatively meaningful to you because of where you're from, but Trevor Noah's book.
Right.
If you have Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, I believe is the title.
It is.
Hearing the audio version of that rather than reading that is all the difference in the world because he's telling a story. He's not reading a book. So kudos to your sister for pointing that out to you. Along the same line of hearing criticism, I think all of us eventually ask for input. At some point, we say, well, what do you think? And people will give us their thoughts. I know I certainly do. And I do it when people don't ask for it, which is a bad habit. But then people get upset if you don't follow what their input is. So that's on them. But I want to make that point for reminder for myself, but also for all of my listeners that we can receive input. That doesn't mean we're obligated to follow that input. And it's up to us to use our discretion and our experience, just the way you've described you have, to say, okay, I hear that, I don't necessarily agree with that, or it's not applicable to me, and not feel obligated. And if someone gets upset and say, well, I gave you that input, and this especially is true in business. I suspect you've had employees through the years that kind of said, well, I gave you my opinion, you didn't follow it. Okay, well, I appreciate your input, but that's not the end all. So anyway, that's just a quick trigger that you've helped me rethink, because I find it to be very important. Let's move on to where you are now as a published author, as a certified integrative nutrition health coach. You created a website on the topic called wellnow.co.za. Wellnow, WELLNOW.co.za, which will be in the show notes, everybody. All of her information, all of her contact information will be in the show notes. So talk to me about, you gave the starting point of you were going to do something and you said, no, you realized that wasn't where you were meant to be. How did you go about deciding to get that training? How did you then turn that into a book? Because frankly, you've written 2 books in a reasonably short amount of time, which is very impressive and probably comes from your communications skills. But let me quit talking and ask you, tell us the story, give us the insight as to how you became the coach that you are now.
Sure. So, as I said, I took a step back from Eclipse. It was necessary. I was very ill and was struggling to find my wellness. I was diagnosed with ulcerative in 2010. So I had lived with the disease for a number of years and was struggling to get into remission. Had tried many things. I'd been on medical trials, et cetera, and when COVID hit, the medical trial that I was on, which was relatively successful, I managed to get into remission a couple of times, but then would have another flare. That medical trial was discontinued. And at that point, I decided, again, in retrospect, a massive turning point in my life, but not a decision that I took in a very heavy way at the time. It just intuitively felt right and something I just did. But I chose to go off all medication and approach my health in a drug-free way. I had already been following a very strict diet for many, many years. And the big trigger and the massive turning point was the leaving the Eclipse and leaving the stress, a lot of stress, and also finding my personal voice in relationships, which is something that I really struggled with. And I think the combination of the lifestyle changes, I started exercising, the diet changes, which I'd always had, the lifestyle changes, the relationship changes, the lack of stress, just formed like a miracle cure, I guess. And I managed to get into remission and have been in remission for 2 years drug-free, which is quite remarkable for ulcerative colitis, which is known as a disease without cure. So for a long time, I did nothing. I mean, dare I say, I was just really focusing on myself and focusing on my health. And I had a moment where I looked up and thought, okay, it's time for the next iteration of Jacki. We've done the communication thing and we did it quite well. And the health is now in a really good space. I'm feeling really good about myself and the place that I am in the world. What's my purpose? It genuinely was a question that I asked. And probably, again, a little bit unconventionally, I went to go and see an intuitive coach. So a life coach of sorts, but someone who works with intuition, works with crystals, etc. And she had this very grand vision for me that I was going to be a healer, but I was going to take my communication skills, that my life's purpose is communication, and that I was going to take the communication that I had pretty much done from here outward in the business, and I was going to start communicating from here outward to a large number of people, which just seemed crazy to me. I didn't know what she was talking about. I felt very lost. But I did dedicate myself to spending the next short while being quite introspective, meditating, listening to a lot of podcasts, reading a lot of books, and just feeling what came from the universe and being open to the signs and being open to what that next step might be. And I mean, gosh, I could tell you a million stories of little idiosyncrasies and synchronicities, which there's no such thing as synchronicity, or there is a lot about synchronicity. It's not luck, right? It's not coincidence. And found my path to studying at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and certified as a coach. Knew intuitively I didn't want to be a coach, which was interesting. So I studied to be a coach knowing I didn't want to be a coach, but it just felt like the right thing to do, and I would just see where the road took me, and I was quite open to the experience. Realized in doing the studies that I hadn't learned anything I didn't already know. And I don't say that in a boastful way, but it was a real aha moment for me when I realized that the 14 years of illness that I'd had and all the research that I'd done and all the work that I'd done, I'd actually self-taught something that was fairly significant that was now being taught to other people. And I already knew it, but I knew it because I'd lived the experience. And I realized that my next journey and my purpose in life was to take that message out into the world on a greater platform and help people to achieve the wellness that we all deserve to have.
That's an incredible story, and there's two really strong takeaways that I've gotten from it, and thank you for sharing that. So, first of all, it was an incredible turning point in your life to go from a business that you excelled at, frankly, and to go down a path that you were completely unsure of. So that's one thing. Just again, whether that was risk to you or not, it's a sign of bravery, and it's a sign of expanding from what I would call our comfort zone. And if we don't at least push our comfort zone, we're never going to grow. But two things that really struck me from that. First of all, it seems like a radical turning point to go from the communications business to being a gut health coach, but it's not really. Because it makes all the sense in the world. And you touched on it. All of the skills of communication, you're just channeling in a different area. So all of that work that you've done, all of that experience that you've had is going to make you brilliant at bringing the message forward. The second thing is, I have to admire how you've taken charge of your own situation and taken some input and some from the medical field. All too often, myself and others just go at a doctor's, in particular in Western medicine, well, the doctor says this, but medicine is called a practice for a reason, right? And no one knows ourselves better than ourselves. So for you to step up and say, I know what's going on, and this is what's worked for me, and then say, okay, I'm a communications expert, let me communicate this to people and help them, to me is a really powerful twofold point. So again, thank you for sharing that. You talked about one of the greatest triggers for that is stress. So across everything to date, what's one of, if not the most stressful points or situations in your life that you had to navigate, and how did you get through that?
Well, the first was my divorce. It was a very, very stressful time for me. I had literal heart palpitations. I struggled a lot through that. That was very stressful. How I dealt with it, quite honestly, I don't have the answer for that, because I think I detached myself very much from myself at the time, and I don't have very many solid memories from that time. So I probably didn't cope with it particularly well. And it probably was one of the reasons that my ulcerative colitis was triggered, which happened after the divorce. So I would say in retrospect, I didn't deal with it very well, but it was certainly a very stressful period of my time. And then I think what I've come to realize lately, funny enough, when we did the Integrative Nutrition Health course, part of it was that we had to go through coaching sessions ourselves with a coach, and it was a group coaching session. And in the group coaching session, it was just an average day. And the coach said, go around the room and tell us your story. and got to me. And I was very, very willing and able to say, as everybody else did, my name is Jacki and I have ulcerative colitis. And I started telling my story and I burst into tears for no good reason at all. I was so emotional about it. And it was I was sobbing hysterically, could barely speak. And that was a big moment for me. After the call, I sat back and realized that my disease had lasted so many years that I never realized how very traumatic it was, because it wasn't a moment. We have an accident or an incident and we can pinpoint a point in life and go, oh, that was a really traumatic experience. But because the disease had been so protracted, I never acknowledged it as a trauma, and it was. Mm-hmm. And it's very triggering for me to tell my story. I tell it in the book, obviously, but when I have to tell it face to face with someone, I always cry. It's very, very traumatic.
Well, I'll leave the telling of your story to people reading your books, and with that in mind, talk to me about the books, your first and second book, and if you have them, hold them up so that people watching this on the YouTube channel can recognize it when they see it. I think the covers are brilliant, and I suspect the content is equally, though I have to admit I have not read the books.
Thank you, Bill. And funny you say that. We were talking earlier about criticism and the sharpest criticism, and I'd forgotten this because I'm very good at forgetting criticism, but somebody who I really, really respect. He is a great writer and just an all-round great human, and he had asked for a copy of my book to review it, and he has told me that he hates the cover. He said that, and he's not wrong. His rationale was that your gut and your microbiome is such a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's here to support us, and it is a thing of beauty, and that I have absolutely debased it with my cover. And he's not wrong, but it was done with intent. So I was able to take his criticism and go, yeah. I hear you, but the reason I did these covers is, and I do have reason for it. So this is my first book. It's called Well Now, Reclaim Your Life from Ulcerative Colitis, the book I wish I had been given when I was diagnosed. And the cover, as you can see, is something which I think all people with serious inflammatory bowel disease, colitis, Crohn's, diverticulitis, we become very desensitized to certain aspects of life that perhaps other people are a little bit more shocked by. And I wanted a cover that stood out, and that people in my community of IBD sufferers could go, oh, that's funny. I can relate to that. So, I was going to call the book Shit Happens, but I thought that probably wouldn't do particularly well. And
plus, I think there are several of those already published. So just some unsolicited input from a marketing branding guy who's not an accomplished author. Authors typically aren't great creatives, just my experience. So what you've done there is you have a cover that does exactly what you said. It draws attention, and it does it in a non-offensive way. I mean, we as a society live on emoji. We communicate in emoji. Emojis were created to communicate visually through visual cues. But having that title wrapped around it, you're going to get someone to look at that, and then they're going to read the title and the subtitle, The Book I Wish I Had When I Was Diagnosed. Boom. That's you might consider getting into the communications business.
I'll think about it. It's a bit stressful, I hear.
Yeah.
And then, Bill, this is the second book. It's called Get Well Now, Heal Your Gut to Transform Your Life, the book that everybody should be reading. And
okay.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you gave me the kudos for writing both books so quickly after one another, but I have a major confession to make, which is very, very important that people understand. They are the same book. The book on ulcerative colitis came out, and so many people I had found out the sales have been phenomenal. I'm very, very blessed and remain shocked and surprised every day when my Amazon count comes back, and I was like, what? How many books sold overnight? It's really doing incredibly well. But a lot of people who were purchasing the book didn't have ulcerative colitis, but were buying it because it had so much general gut health advice that really is applicable to everybody. And I had the thought, being in the communications industry, that perhaps the title of the book was a little bit restrictive and that it might turn some people away because they will go, oh, yeah, I'm quite interested in that book, but I don't have ulcerative colitis. And I didn't want to restrict the ability for the average person to get the advice that I think everybody should have. So it's the same book, but it's slightly repackaged in that the opening chapter of the ulcerative colitis one is very much in depth about my story and the disease and how to diagnose it and what the treatments are and all the things that would be very specific to people with UC. The second book is just about the impact of gut health on your life more broadly. Other than that, the contents of the book are almost identical, small tweaks and the different frequently asked questions at the back. But that's why they happen so quickly. It's the same book.
Well, and it's the same book, but what you've so cleverly done is realize that you have two audiences.
Yes.
And that the one book meets one audience and that another audience has great interest, but from a different perspective. So there's a phrase I love, which is move the flashlight. So you've moved the focus on what you're talking about, even though it's the same thing, you're presenting it in a different way. And I also have to applaud you that the covers go so well together, literally and figuratively.
That was the intention.
The first cover leads to the second cover, one hopes. So do you have plans for more books other than the audio books, which will be re-recorded soon?
Yeah, so we've got the audiobooks being re-recorded, and I have no plans for a further book at this stage. I've get asked that question a lot. I think probably because I had two right off the bat. So clearly I have books in me. No, I have been told my entire life I should write a travel book because I am a really bad traveler. If something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong with me. And I have some very funny stories that probably do belong in a book, but that's not in my current plan. So no, but I do have other plans, but a book is not one of them.
Okay, now you've opened the door, so I'm going to walk in. Give us one of the examples of your travel tribulations, trials and tribulations of travel with Jacki.
You've put me on the spot and I have such a bad memory and I have to remember one. I mean, Bill, I've walked off planes and torn a calf muscle on the first step off the plane to the point that I've had to be carried down the stairs, put on a wheelchair and wheeled into the airport and then not been able to drive my hire car because my calf muscle has been torn in half. I have dropped perfume bottles on bathroom floors and been, trying to mop it up with all my clothes so at least I get the benefit of the perfume smell on all my luggage. I mean, I've been stuck in lifts, so I've missed flights because the lift has stopped midway in the airport and I have, missed a flight due to that. I mean, there are countless stories, countless.
Sounds like a book to me. So at the very least, you might want to start visioning the cover because you're very good with creative, clever, relevant covers. So speaking of books, what is the most impactful book that you've read in your life? What book and or author has had the biggest impact on you? And what was the impact?
Okay, so I'm an avid reader. I read every night before I go to sleep. Doesn't matter what time it is. I can crawl into bed at 3 a.m. after a night on the town and I will take a book out and read. It's a ritual. So I have read many, 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 many books in my life. I think probably the one that I know. So when I moved countries, I cleared out I have a Kindle, thank goodness. Most of my books are on Kindle, but I cleared out bookshelves and bookshelves of books. I only kept one book and I travel around the world with it. I've flown back to Cape Town now for the summer. I brought the book with me. I read it often and it is The Alchemist. Alchemist is an interesting book. I think it comes to you when you need to read it. I'd heard about The Alchemist many, many, many years ago, obviously, and I had attempted to read it 3 times, and on 3 occasions just couldn't get past the first chapter. It just wasn't for me. And the 4th time I picked the book up, it blew my mind, and continues to do so every time I pick it up and read it again, which I do often. And I think the lessons for me there are about the fact that life is a journey. It's as much about the journey as the destination, but that we all do have a life's purpose. And we do have, as I say, this personal legend that we are obligated to live out. But it's not about reaching that point. It's the journey along the way. And there's so many messages. The other one is also about just trusting yourself, trusting in the knowledge that you have the knowledge within you. I'm sure many people take many different things from that book because I think it can be read in many different ways, but that is my takeout.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'll tie back to something you said earlier in our conversation, that there's no synchronicity, and I believe there's no coincidence. But I think I now have to go to either Amazon or Barnes & Noble and buy The Alchemist, because this is literally the third time in 3 consecutive days that book has come up in my life.
And 3 of the magic number.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Okay. I didn't realize that, but I think I have another book purchase in my very near future. So interesting how things work, don't you think?
Wonderful. I would love to hear what you think once you've read it, and you have to read it. If it's coming into your life now is the time you're meant to read it. I do believe that.
Well,
it is very, very special.
I think I've got space to put it up there, so I will get it and I will read it. That'll be amazing. So at this point, I don't want to run too much longer, but the new iteration of What's the Point, as people will notice, has gotten to a bunch of different points in your life. But I'm still going to end our episode with the question that I used to end every episode with, which is, however you care to answer this, Jacki, what's the point?
There are many that I could list. Health is wealth. You can have all the wealth in the world. If you don't have your health, you have nothing. That's a big one for me. But I think the golden thread of this episode has got to be trust your gut. Listen to your gut, which I take literally and figuratively. I think in life, when it comes to finding your purpose, it's nobody knows your purpose the way you know your purpose. Tune into yourself, tune into your gut feelings, gut knowledge, because ultimately you know what is right for you and you know the path that is right for you. And then if I take it into a very literal sense, and I take my books and my knowledge on Well Now, I would say that the gut health is such an area where people are very dogmatic about it. You know, the minute you get ill or you think you've got an issue, people say, you must follow this diet, or, oh, diet, well, you are what you eat, or, oh, you must take this supplement, or, oh, you cannot eat fiber when you've got ulcerative colitis. Oh, you must eat fiber. Fiber feeds the microbiome. I mean, gosh, such contradictory advice from people, and, you know, they're very dogmatic about it. And I think that the one thing I would say is, Nobody has the same gut as you. Nobody. And you have to listen to your gut, because what is true for you may not be true for somebody else. So it's about trial and error and finding the things. Of course, gather all the knowledge from as many sources as you can get. Of course, try as many things as possible, but ultimately listen to what your gut is telling you, because it knows best. Everyone is bio-individual. What supplement works for you will not work for me. But you are also your own best physician. Don't give up your agency to doctors and the medical world. Listen to what they have to say, absorb the information, but ultimately you are your best physician. You know your body best, and you know what works for your body. So listen to that. Don't take it for granted. Trust your gut.
Brilliant. And I take that both literally and figuratively, to trust your gut. And speaking of brilliant, thank you so much again for your time and for sharing your story. Jacki, you were as impactful, knowledgeable, entertaining, and enjoyable as I anticipated this to be. Everyone listening, check out wellnow.co.za, wellnow.co.za, and find out more about gut health, whether you have osteochloritis or whether you don't. And get the books. If nothing else, they're great book covers to have on a coffee table. It'll get some people talking when they come over. Jacki, thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill. I so appreciate your time. Amazing.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise there is value to be gained in every one. Taking a second to rate, review, and share the show helps make us more discoverable and enables others to find out what's the point. If you'd like to learn more about Bill Ellis and his services, please visit his website, billellis.com. See you next time.